This is your fault. 100% this is your fault.
Finally, some good whiskey.
I didn't want to do this. There's way too much information.
What's your problem with Canada?
I don't have a problem with Canada, other than their politics. However, Canadian whiskey, let's talk about it.
Let's really talk about it.
Let's talk about it. I don't have the greatest opinion of Canadian whiskey for a multitude of reasons. We discussed in a prior episode that Canadian whiskey is typically, or traditionally, it was made with rye. Rye is a delicious grain. In the bourbon world, they use it as a flavoring grain. We spent
a whole 4-part series
talking about rye whiskey, where rye is the main ingredient. I love rye. Problem I have with Canada and the rules, and this goes a little bit deeper than a lot of people would probably get into just on their own, but I read a lot of books and pay attention to.
And many leather-bound books.
Many leather-bound books.
And my apartment smells of rich mahogany.
I'm friends with Merlots, and that's dumb. Anyway, so to be fair, Canadian whiskey typically was rye whiskey. Nowadays, with the rules that they have in Canada...
What are the rules?
The rules are basically this. As long as it's distilled and shows and has the characteristics of rye whiskey. Now, take that with a grain of salt. What are the characteristics? Right? So as long as it has the characteristics of rye whiskey, it can be called a Canadian whiskey.
Now, pray tell, what on God's green earth do characteristics mean? Like, does it have to taste similar?
Yeah, it's got to have a similar taste, color. Yeah, it's got to look like a rye whiskey. And here's one of the interesting things that people don't understand. What's the biggest grain that grows across the world? It's corn.
Yeah.
So Canadian distillers have figured out if they can distill corn, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine. Bourbon, we do it all the time. We add it to rye whiskey. We add it to malt whiskey. Corn's delicious. We love our corn tortillas, right? The issue is one, it doesn't matter about the proof that it comes off the still. I'm going to leave that be. But it doesn't have to be rye whiskey to be a Canadian whiskey. They can use corn, which is fine.
Which in theory
if
is
that's
fine.
What you want to do. But Canada is the only country that can use coloring and flavoring. They can
use coloring and
literally
flavoring?
add it. Now, before people freak out or like, oh my gosh, coloring, in Scotch, in Irish, they're allowed to use coloring.
Oh, sure.
Because what coloring is imagine the inside of the barrel, right?
Mm-hmm.
A used whiskey barrel. They shave off the charcoal, right? Add some water, cook it down, right? So it's technically, wood sugars,
mm-hmm.
right? But that's in in Scotland and Ireland, you can add coloring to it to get the color that you want to get, partially because the climates are so darn cold.
So
right.
the spirit is more likely to be clear, and no one wants it to be clear.
Correct. You may as well, at that point, you're drinking vodka, right? But now they are aging them in barrels. Now, the difference between Canada and the U.S. is they don't have to be new charred oak barrels.
Do they have to be any kind of wood?
Well, it has to be wood.
All right.
It has to be, containers. But, they're going to be buying primarily used bourbon barrels, used sherry barrels, very much the way that the Scots and the Irish do the same thing. Because in Scotland and Ireland, we're the only country that has to be a new charred oak barrel. That's just the way bourbon works. And I think I'm sure the timber company had something to do with that decision back in the day. So it's not uncommon for used barrels, even in the American scene. Secondary barrels are huge, but it has to go through the process. You have to age it in new charred oak containers.
Sure.
And then from there, you kind of do what you want with it. Now, Scotland and Ireland, they don't have to be brand new charred oak barrels. Reason being, they're in Scotland and Ireland. They don't have a lot of oak just growing in that part of the world. So
it's very cold.
So they're big purchasers of a lot of our American
Of the used barrels.
whiskey barrels, right? Yeah, and what's interesting is, when we, as Americans, as distillers, when they're done with them, they're not going to ship 8,000, 10,000 barrels of whiskey or empty barrels over on a boat. What they do is they basically decommission them. So they take the rings off,
And they
they break the staves down,
Yeah.
they stack them all up on ships, send them to Scotland or Ireland, and then from there,
they reconstruct.
they put them back together, right? So that's not that's not the biggest thing. The biggest problem that I have with most Canadian whiskey is they can add flavoring to it.
And flavoring, I believe you've gotten into with rum before, is a issue because you don't really. It's not a pure expression of the spirit.
And to be a whiskey snob, it's not the purest because you're adding kind of whatever you want. There's not a lot of rules. Now, you could argue that, do you want to eat a piece of chicken that has no seasoning on it? You just throw it in a pan and eat it? You can. Is it going to be delicious? I don't know, probably, maybe not, but, to add some salt and pepper or seasonings to it, that's kind of cool. But there's so much that you get out of an oak barrel that, I really don't think
I would say that
you need to do that.
It's not even that. It's because it doesn't specify. Because if, say you do want to throw whatever the flavoring is, it doesn't say that on the bottle. It doesn't say whiskey flavored with blank.
Correct.
It just says whiskey.
Now, to be fair, Canadian whiskey, obviously during Prohibition, was really popular.
No doubt.
Because they were still making it, and they just, satisfy the cravings of the Americans down here that couldn't get it. And like a lot of things, you get used to what you're drinking. Most people are not drinking Canadian whiskey neat.
Definitely not.
Most people are not drinking it on the rocks. It's a mixer, and that's fine. Now, I'm done crapping on Canadian whiskey.
We are?
For now. Because there are some companies that still take pride and really do it really, really well. So there's a company, I think it's called Alberta Premium, where they make, at least from what I've seen, they make like a 60% alcohol, so 120 proof cask strength, 100% rye whiskey. Now, if you watched the video about our rye series, 100% rye is delicious. The one that we had, I loved it. Right? Right. So it can be done really well. It's just going to be at a higher price point. And instead of looking at Canadian whiskeys as mixers, which most of them are, you can get in the weeds and really enjoy them and have fun. Now it leads you to companies like Rare Perfection, that's a Kentucky NDP, non-distilling producer, but they source their whiskey from Canada.
And it is the sole bottle of Canadian whiskey, aside from
that,
Crown Peach Royal,
that's in this room. So this is actually, there's a couple different offerings of this. I have the 14. I think there's a 15 year as well. Tilt that bottle over because I haven't used it in forever, but yeah, we're gonna try it.
You have such a high opinion of this whiskey. I remember you used it to commemorate the passing of a family member.
I did because, and I guess that's why I said I'm done crapping on Canadian whiskey because,
at least for now.
But it can be done really, really well. It really can. Now this
because it's rye whiskey. Rye whiskey can be done well.
Correct. Now this is 14 years. So it aged in the barrel for 14 years. Was I make a mess?
I remember my first beer.
Right. This is going to be, if I'm not mistaken, at cask strength, and I can't read any of that stuff. Well, maybe not. Not cask strength, but 100 proof. 100.7. So this is out of Bardstown, Kentucky. But rare lot Canadian whiskey bottled by Rare Perfection. And this is what they do. You'll see, I said, I've seen the 14s, I've seen the 15s. We got this more than a few years ago. But when you smell it, you're like, oh wow, like this is...
It smells wonderful.
Yep. There's still that rice spice and that mintiness, that baking spices.
That really shows the benefit that a colder climate like the Canadian region can provide.
Correct.
Because you can age it for 14 years and it won't taste like I'm biting into a tree.
Correct. That's one of the benefits of the colder climates. That's also a negative, just like with Scotch.
It takes longer.
It takes longer to get where it needs to get to.
Whereas you get normal Texas whiskeys and it takes 2 years to age
Correct.
something.
Yeah, if you had a 14-year Texas bourbon or Texas rye,
shoot, you might as well bite into a tree at that point.
That's tough. I'd rather go chew on our oak trees up front.
I'd rather take a face plant and a pile of wet alfalfa than try that.
Yeah, but what's interesting is you still get baking spices, but you know, you're still getting the vanillas and the brown sugars in there.
Probably
right?
because it's so cold.
Yeah, and it's able to absorb that barrel just so much longer. Where down here in the States, well, let's put it this way, down here in Texas, that would be an abomination probably.
No doubt,
At
because it's
14
too
years.
hot.
Right.
Skål. Let's throw it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so good. Wow. Once again, it drinks hotter than 100 proof, right? And that's your rice spice, your baking spices really just punching up the flavor with what seems like proof. Oh wow. Well, I just got like a vanilla candy. Oh wow. Wow, that's really cool. Really from that barrel influence, almost like a Werther's original, but instead of it being caramel, it's vanilla. When I was a kid, they had those little chocolates with
I can see
with
that.
the white vanilla cream.
No disrespect meant, but it is kind of like an artificial sweet, like a candy sweet.
Yeah, boy, that's good.
It's really quite remarkable.
Now, to be fair, this is 14 years old. This is lot number 3. So I don't remember when I got it, but
Long time
I would
ago.
say it was at least 4 or 5 years ago. But what a fun. Now, to be fair, this is a really expensive bottle.
Sure.
Um,
It is 14 years
I
old.
think it was 150-ish, which actually, if you do your math, that goes, you know, with it. So in the whiskey world, at least in America,
It's $10.
it's sort of $10 for every year for an age statement. So for 14 years, that should be $140-ish, $150 bottle.
Right.
But once again, I go back. That was so much fun because you get that mintiness and the baking spices, but then just on the back of that, on the back of the palate, all of a sudden I got like that vanilla cream candy, and that's not from the grain. That's from the barrels they finished it in. So that's letting it sit that long. Picked up a lot of that.
Slowly absorbed.
Yeah, picked up a lot of that vanilla flavor.
Which I think is I think Canadian whiskey could really be interesting if they lean more towards the rare perfection side. And of course, you can have like bottom shelf offerings, but I think there are more offerings like rare perfection where they really take advantage of the cold climate.
Wow, that's so good. I can drink that forever. Wow. Yeah, that's part of the issue, though. You have to figure for every year that whiskey sits in that barrel, they're not making any money on it.
And unless the booze industry is subsidized like how Spain and Portugal subsidize the wine industry.
Correct. Which it's probably not going to do. I mean, it's just, yeah, I guess maybe that's sort of my problem with, you know, like I said earlier, I'm done crapping on Canadian whiskey until I'm not, but that's sort of the problem is that you have examples of stuff that's done really, really well.
But it takes time because it's so cold.
But it does take time.
And Canadian whiskey, to be frank, doesn't have the same prestige as Scotch does.
No, they haven't been doing it as long, number one, even though I think the Scotch or the Irish, when they landed in Canada, they brought their distillation techniques as well.
No doubt.
They grow great grains up there. It's just that, you know, Canadian whiskey is typically going to be a mixer, you know, which is fine.
Or it's going to be flavored like this.
Or they're going to flavor it, you know. Crown Royal's great at that, you know, with all their different flavorings. And,
great as a word for it.
You know, like I said, if you're just looking to catch a little buzz and make a cocktail, great. But, you know, I'm not drinking Crown Peach or Crown Blackberry. Just neat because it's so good. Now, something like this or something like that I've been interested in trying is that Alberta Premium, because that's the distillery but yeah, unfortunately, it's a $70 bottle. So
I think the false advertising is also an issue because this says peach flavored whiskey when it is a cool 70 proof.
yeah, well, that's most, typically with flavored whiskeys, if you get something that's 70 proof, that's pretty standard because they're adding
Makes sense.
a bunch of, whatever they're adding flavoring to it. So, so it's probably going in the whiskey in the barrel at, maybe 80 proof, and then it's going to drop maybe 70 proof. And it's going to drop in proof a little bit, but Crown, I mean, that kind of stuff is just that's not one of those things that, if you're a real connoisseur, you're just not gonna.
It has its place.
Everything has its place.
Of course. Otherwise it wouldn't exist.
Correct. And clearly they make a lot more money than we do. So obviously they're doing something that people like.
Indeed.
Right. And there are some others from what I remember at the store that were kind of, in that 80, 90 proof area where, once again, it's still a mixer. That's fine if that's the way you like to drink it. But you can have some fun with Canadian whiskey. You can find some really good stuff. Just unfortunately, unlike the bourbon or the rye world here in the States, your sort of entry price point is going to be, upwards of, $60, $70, probably at the low end for something really good.
Which is tough when you can go to Scotland or Ireland or Japan or India.
Sure. Or bourbon or rye or wheat.
Or stay in the States.
Whatever, right. So, yeah, these are very good, especially this is, I've said it twice, this is fantastic. Yeah, man, it's so
I believe the moral of the story is we hope to see more rare perfection style offerings from Canada in the years to come.
I hope so, because they can do. Now, in one of the books I read, the author was a fan of Canadian whiskey, and he'd been to, it's gonna sound weird, but like Black Velvet, that type of stuff, and he appreciated it for what they were doing. Where I think of Black Velvet, that's like bottom shelf, stealing booze out of your buddy's parents' liquor cabinet when you're in high school because you just want to get ripped, right?
Right.
You don't care what it tastes
Just taking a drag from it.
Yeah, it's tough. Then you add water to it afterwards so that his parents don't get all pissed off. And they're not going to notice a difference anyway. But yeah, there are some good ones out there. I think this might be. I don't know. This might be the future of Canadian whiskey.
I think it should be.
Where you get NDPs that are here in the States.
Well, it's just like how Jack Daniels for a long time was really boring. Like they were coasting on Jack Daniels number 7, Gentleman Jack, their flavored offerings, but then they offered the single barrel, and that's
sort of changed everything.
Changed the game. Now they got their bonded series, which is really interesting and really weird.
They're triple mash. They're different,
bonded rye, the bonded. It's just
they're
cool and interesting.
Coy Hills or barrel proof bourbons and ryes. Yeah,
I would agree. I think NDPs, United States based offerings, because let's face it, we're the biggest market for liquor on the planet.
I think so. But what's cool, and like I said, I didn't like really dive into this. I don't know if this might have been aged 14 years in Canada. It might have been aged.
Just going off the taste, it's probably
a little bit down here, but I would think it was aged in Canada.
Mostly aged in Canada,
and
at least.
This isn't a single barrel, so it's a nice blend of multiple barrels. They might have let those sit here in Kentucky for a while before they blended them. But man, it's so good. It's just unfortunately, because it takes so long to age something like that, it's just the price point's just gonna be high. But if you can overlook the price point on those, they're very, very good. So Canadian whiskey doesn't have to be a mixture. It doesn't have to be bad.
It can be great,
It
just
can
like
be-
every
it can
other
It
expression.
can be great, but unfortunately, you're probably going to pay up for that.